Hello and welcome to the March edition of the WinUI Community Call. I'm your host, Gabby, and I'll be joining you for this morning, afternoon, or evening. So a little bit about the Community Call. It takes place on the third Wednesday of every month at 9 a.m. Pacific, which, since we've just switched over to daylight savings, is 1600 UTC. Our next call is April 19th, which is the third Wednesday of April. You can reach out to us on GitHub at Microsoft UI XAML or Windows App SDK, or on Twitter at Windows UI for the latest updates. So we have the slide here to give a little bit about what is WinUI. I wanted to note, although we are live right now, this is also recorded. So if you're new to WinUI, welcome, and check out this slide for a little bit more info. Great. So the agenda for today, we're going to give a little bit of an update about the WinUI gallery, deep dive into how File Explorer migrated over to WinApp SDK, and give some general WinApp SDK and WinUI news and updates. So first up, I would like to introduce Greg, who's a product manager on the WinUI team. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Gabby. Excited to be here. Excited to be back on the community call. This one is very special because we just announced a major new release to the WinUI 3 gallery. So we've been working on this new update for the last couple months with Marcel, Niels. So big shout out to both of them and also to the rest of the team. And so we're super excited to be announcing this new release of the WinUI 3 gallery. So I'll just spend a couple minutes trying to give you like a quick overview of the changes we've made, and then I'll jump into a demo to show you the app in action. So this is a new screenshot of the WinUI 3 gallery. So this is what it looks like in dark mode now. So as you can see, it's a new refreshed design. We've tried to amplify and make the design much better. We've also introduced a new app icon, so you can see it on the top right corner of your screen. So here near the title, you can see that we've introduced a new app icon. And then last but not least, we've also introduced a new design section, which I'm particularly excited about. So if you go to the next slide, Gabby, perfect. Yeah, before I jump into the demo, I just want to say as well that we've really tried to listen to as much feedback as possible with the last couple months. We know how difficult it is to deal with WinUI brushes and colors, and it can be quite confusing at times to know which brush to use, when is the right time to use it. We've received a lot of feedback as well that it's hard to pick the right icons and stuff like that. So we've tried to gather all this feedback and address it in this new updates. So that's why we're super excited about this new release. So with that in mind, I'll then share my screen and show you a live demo of the WinUI gallery. Let me do that. Present, share screen. Awesome, it should be coming through. Let me just wait a couple seconds to make sure. There you go. Awesome. Cool. So yeah, this is the new WinUI 3 gallery with the new design and everything. So we're excited for you to check it out. It's live in the store right now, so you can go ahead and download it directly. So yeah, this is the new gallery. This is what you'll see when you first open it. I have those windows open as well in the background, just to show you the evolution of the design over the last couple of years. On the left side, this is a screenshot we took 2 years ago that shows you the design of the gallery, what it looked like 2 years ago. And then on the right side, this is a screenshot of the new gallery that the new design that we released in May last year. So you can see we've made quite a bit of design improvements over 1 year. Then this year we're introducing this new WinUI 3 gallery design. So we believe it's a big improvement even compared to the one that we had released a year ago. As you can see, the home page is completely new. Let me actually put it in full screen so you can see the entire design. But yeah, the home page has been completely revamped. We have the new home tiles here, so you can click on those helpful links here. We've also made a lot of changes to the individual samples. So if we just go to one, so for instance, this button sample page, you'll be able to see that we now have the documentation links at the top of the screen instead of the bottom, because we felt like, before that you had to scroll down all the way down, then you would be able to find all the documentation links. So now we've included all the documentation links at the tops here, so it's super easy to access. Same thing goes for the links to the source code. So if you ever want to look at what the source code looks like for this specific page, you can easily access it here. So you have the XAML and then the C# source code. And then on the right-hand side, you'll recognize those buttons because we haven't changed the placement. We've just kind of redesigned the look of those buttons. But you have the toggle theme button, so to turn the samples from dark mode to light mode. And of course, we have the link button here if you want to send a link to this specific page. And then we have the request feedback button as well, which launches our GitHub repo. So yeah, this is a quick overview of the design changes. We've also made changes to the settings page. So as you can see here, we're now using components from the Windows Community Toolkit. So you'll be able to recognize this familiar design. We've tried to make it more consistent with the other apps as well. So this is why we've changed the design of this settings page. So yeah, that's a quick overview of the design changes that we made to the WinUI 3 gallery. We're really excited for you to check it out and let us know what you think. And then I want to also grab your attention towards this left side of the screen here. So you'll notice that we have a new design guidance section as well. So if I click on it, it kind of expands and you have those new pages here. And so those pages are dedicated to addressing the feedback that I've just mentioned before. So we have, a page for typography, icons, colors, and then we have a few pages regarding accessibility as well. And so those pages aim to give you more information about how to better design your apps and how to follow the Windows 11 styles. And so you'll see, I'll walk you through each page here, but we've tried to provide as much interactive examples as possible. So yeah, those pages are really dedicated to transform the WinUI 3 gallery into more than just an app that showcases WinUI controls, but really a developer companion that you can use to make your apps and design your apps by following the Windows 11 styles. So if I just click on each page, I'll just give you a quick overview of each page. But for typography, we have a list of the Windows 11 type ramp. So, you have all the different type styles here and all the specifics of it. And then we also have here a little screenshot that shows you different type styles in action. So you can click on those little buttons to see, okay, for this specific text, what does that correspond to in terms of the type ramp here? So, you can see it in light and dark mode as well. Then we have the icons page. So on this page, we've created a Fluent icons library. So you can go through all of the different icons, all the different Fluent icons. We hope that this will make it super easy for you to, pick the right icons and see what they all look like. So you can easily use the search function here. So if you want to find the export icon, you can click on it. And then you'll have a detailed view of what this icon is all about. You have the icon name, of course, Unicode points, all the good stuff. And then, of course, you have the XAML code and the C# code as well if you want to easily copy paste it into your app. The next page is the colors page. We're really excited about this one because we received so much feedback on this. So this is a list of all the different WinUI colors and brushes. So they're organized based on their category. So we have, for text, fill, stroke, background, signal, etc. So you can see, you have a description you have the name of the brush. You have a description of when to use it. So this is, for badges. This is for the background of the info bar. And then you have the name of the brush as well. So you can easily copy it and paste it into your code as well. So we've tried to make it super easy. And yeah, something else that I also want to highlight is this, the toggle theme button also works here. So you can easily toggle between the light and dark theme to see what the colors look like in both modes. So we hope that you all appreciate this feature. And then the last thing that I want to highlight here is this new accessibility section. We have included 3 different pages. And so those pages are dedicated to accessibility and to show you how to make your apps more accessible and more usable for everyone. So we have a page for screen reader support, how to make it super easy for your users to access your app's content using narrator and other screen readers. So we have a few samples here that kind of walk you through the main APIs to use. We have a keyboard navigation support page as well. So how to make it easy for your users to navigate using keyboard in your app. So, we have a bunch of examples here as well, how to create shortcuts, how to take advantage of headings and landmarks, all that. And then the last page is this color contrast page. So we've included this neat little tool here, the contrast checker. So this tool allows you to select 2 colors. So for instance, if I want to pick this blue, and then I'll pick, this white color as the background color, you'll be able to see if they pass the accessibility color contrast tests. And so the goal here is to really show you that, you have to use 2 colors that work well together so that it's easy for your users to read the text over some background. So we provided this tool. You can see if they pass the different tests. You have the contrast ratio here, and then you have a preview of what it looks like as well. So you can use this tool to find the right color combinations. So yeah, that's a quick overview of the different changes we've made. We fixed a lot of bugs as well. There's a lot of hidden improvements, I'd say, with this update as well. But this is a quick rundown of the main features. So we're really excited for you to test it out and to tell us what you think about it. So I'll then pass it back to Gabby.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Greg.
Thank you.
Thanks for showing all of those features. We're really excited to see them. Awesome. So next up, we're going to be joined by Tommy to give a little bit of an overview on some of the technical challenges and things we had to work through while developing File Explorer on WinApp SDK. So I'll add Tommy to the stream. He'll be over voice.
Yeah, thanks, Gabby. Yes, I don't have a camera today, but I'll be talking over File Explorer WinApp SDK and how we kind of made that happen. So for those who don't know, we're now shipping a version of File Explorer that uses WinUI 3 or WinApp SDK instead of WinUI 2. And it's available actually right now in our WIP update channels. And today I'll be talking about some of the technical challenges that we faced while actually standing up this File Explorer version. So the big thing that we had to solve is that File Explorer runs as part of this gigantic Explorer exe process, which contains a lot of other components which also used Windows UI XAML or WinUI 2. And because of its size, it's not practical to convert all of Explorer exe at once to WinApp SDK. So we had to figure out a way of having both WinUI 2 and WinApp SDK or WinUI 3 running inside the same process. And we'll be diving more into this issue today and how we solved it. And 2 other things I wanted to highlight briefly that we won't be talking about more today is we had to figure out a way of taking ongoing fixes and work for Windows UI XAML File Explorer and migrating them over to WinApp SDK File Explorer with minimal overhead. And then also shipping the WinApp SDK as part of the OS for Windows because File Explorer had to be able to use it. So the first issue is this type name ambiguity problem. So because we're using both WinUI 2 and WinUI 3 in the same process, that causes an issue because they both contain some types with the same name. For example, we have the WinUI 2 tab view and WinUI 3 tab view. And this duplicate type name issue causes issues at both compile time. So for example, how does C++ WinRT know which headers to generate for which types? And how do we know at runtime, how does WinRT know at runtime which type to actually activate? So if we ask for a tab view, what does that actually mean? So this first issue, compile time ambiguity, the way we solved it was to, next slide. The way we solved this was to enforce that a single DLL can only use WinUI 2 or WinUI 3, but not both. And the same applies to static libs. So for example, you can't have a DLL built against both a WinUI 2 static lib and WinUI 3 static lib. It has to be just one or the other. And this is to avoid ODR issues where we have, let's say, a C++ WinRT header for WinUI 2 conflicting with definitions for WinUI 3. And we also had to create new binaries that mimic the usage of WinUI 2 for File Explorer, but against WinFSDK instead, to also solve this issue. And the other thing we had to solve was the runtime problems. So if we're asking for a tab view at runtime for WinRT, does that mean WinUI 2 tab view or WinUI 3 tab view? And the way we solve this is that an Explore exe thread can mark itself as being for WinFSDK. And this ensures, this will cause us to redirect type activations to either WinFSDK or WinUI 2 and ensure that we're activating the right type for the right context. This is not a public API, but you can do this yourself using the detours library to override the row activation factory and reactivate instance methods to redirect activation calls to the right WinUI version. Yep, that's it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Tommy. We got a little bit of an inside look there on the type name ambiguity. So if you want to try out WinUp SDK File Explorer, definitely go into your WIP settings and update to the latest, and you should be able to see it with the pizza icon. Awesome. So next up, we'll be joined by Bob, Software Engineering Manager on WinUI 3 and WinUp SDK. Hi, Bob.
Good morning, good evening, whatever time zone you're in.
Great to have you on.
Go ahead and advance the slide. There we go. So what I wanted to do is just go through and give a little bit of the behind the scenes from the engineering side of some of the things that we've been doing that were not readily apparent just from looking at the code and looking at the runtime releases. Some of the engineering priorities that we're looking at, the first one is going, and we've been actively working to remove copies of code and really minimize the number of active versions that we had. As recently as last year, we were maintaining many versions of WinUI at the same time. So not only WinUI 2, that there were some changes being made there and servicing that, but also looking at versions as old as 0.8, 1.0, 1.1. And it was really expensive for us to make a change and then have to backport it to many different versions. Doing all that and keeping all of that in sync was costing us an extremely large amount of resources. So we've been making engineering improvements to cut down on that. And that's not only with the WinUI code itself, but also we had copies of WinUI Gallery. We had copies of samples. All of those, really minimizing that so that we can make the changes in one place and have that be a single source of truth for all the different versions. And it has greatly improved our efficiency. The second thing is going through and reducing drag. And I mentioned just now all of the changes that Greg made to WinUI Gallery. Before, we had to sync those changes and it was not necessarily on the most recent. So we've gone through, and for the WinUI Gallery, the WinUp SDK samples, Template Studio, Community Toolkit, and really working to get all of those up on 1.2 and soon 1.3, so that we not only are up to date there and showing the latest and greatest, but also using that for our internal testing and validation processes on a regular build basis and keeping those all up to date. It helps us in testing what we ship. We also had some technical debt where we were still maintaining an older version of WinUI in the form of the 0.8 NuGets for our internal processes. And then we go and turn that around and format it into the WinUp SDK. It was extremely expensive because we were testing one version and then shipping another. So we went through and cut the technical debt on that so that we are, in fact, testing exactly what we're shipping and making sure that we're not introducing any issues there. It also made it much, much easier for our developers to test private fixes and to get repros of bugs from the community and test those against the latest builds and do private fixes to validate that. So it was much, much easier for us to work. Those are just some examples of the technical debt that we were working to streamline just to make our own processes easier. The last bullet that I've got here for improving maintainability, we had a case where we were going and updating some of the dependencies that we have, things like CS1RT, our build tools, CBP1RT. And in one case, updating those dependencies was causing us to change upwards of 80 files. And it was completely ridiculous. And so we went through and cleaned that up and streamlined the process so that we can change that in a few places across all of our repos and ensure that we are maintaining the same versions and using the same versions across all of the repos and keeping that in place. So those are just some of the things that we were doing behind the scene just to make it so that our engineering processes could run smoother and we could spend more time on improving the platform and not dealing with some of these technical debt issues. Now, in looking at the backlog, we fully recognize that the 2,800 issues that we've got in the XAML repo, it's a lot of stuff there. And that is just one copy of it, that we do have an internal Azure DevOps repo as well, where we're maintaining issues, and keeping those in sync has been extremely expensive. My team has been going through and looking at the backlog and figuring out how can we get the good information that's out of there in a way that is efficient and make it easy for teams on the WinUI team, but also then looking at the composition team, looking at notifications, looking at all of the other teams that are part of WinUp SDK, and make it easy for them to find their issues. So we've been going through and looking at our triage processes, making it so that we have tags for the teams to understand, here are the issues that they have, so that no one should be looking at all 2,800 issues, but instead I can focus on, here are the 25 issues that I've currently got, and dive in and find those issues and be attacking those problems rather than trying to mine for gold in the large amount that are there. There have been some questions about, do we just declare bankruptcy? Do we just clear all those out and make it? And I've really pushed back against that because there is a lot of good information there. And instead, we're really looking to properly reflect the truth in the repo, close the items that are fixed, document the workarounds that we have, answer the questions that are there. We are not going to answer all the questions. That's just not going to be possible, but doing the best that we can and making it so that repo can be a repository for helpful information on what we're using, the fixes that were made, and exactly what the state of the XAML code is. Gabby, go ahead and advance. So in looking at the partnerships that we have with not only File Explorer, but also with some of our other third-party partners, there have been questions about, okay, what do I as an individual WinUI developer, what is the benefit from getting this? And there's actually been a huge amount of benefit that is coming to the community from these items. As I mentioned before, we were looking to eliminate the number of copies. And it is key that the way that we do our development, we have a main branch that is doing our current development. We then have a stable branch for 1.3 and one for 1.2. But the code that is released from there is the same code that is being released to File Explorer. It's being released to our public releases. All of that is the same pieces. And so as we make a fix for anyone, everyone ends up getting those fixes. And some of the examples of things that we've shipped as a result of this. There was a lot of work on going through and improving the build times, and especially incremental builds, working on debugging and working on the exception handling that was being done, looking at static resource issues. There was a case where the deployment was having a failure, and we made some fixes in that. On the memory and perf side, going and improving the shutdown and making sure that things are closing down in the proper order and the way that they should without crashing. Looking at plugging leaks, looking at thread corruption, so that if WinUI is initialized on a thread, that if it's closed down, that the thread can be reused properly. Looking at accessibility, and that's fixes in the platform, it's fixes in the gallery, similar to what Greg was showing, workarounds in the gallery, but making it so that all of those pieces can be usable by the community, our partners, File Explorer, everyone. And so the line at the bottom here is critical. Anything that was in main by February 28th, those changes are in what we are in the 1.3 release that is going public in roughly in the next month. We've been making some additional APIs and doing that, and we're looking to get all of those new APIs in public as soon as we have the development done on that and rolling those out. So we are not going and doing a separate build for File Explorer or any of the others. This is one copy of WinUI that is going out to all of the customers who are using it. Gabby, next slide. And so finally, I wanted to just go through and talk about some updates. First of all, version 1.2.5 is being released today. It should be rolling out as we speak. And one of the hot items that we've had a lot of questions about is the issue with WebView 2, where when you use keyboard and mouse, that the mouse stops accepting input. The fix for that is in 1.2.5, and it is in 1.3. We also have an issue where battery was being consumed in the Your Phone app, it was continuing to render even though the screen was off. There's a fix for that in 1.2.5. There was a crash in composition shutdown. And so those are just three of the fixes that are in the release going out today for 1.2. For 1.3, we've been continuing to make fixes since the Preview 1 release went out a few weeks ago. The pivot control issue has been fixed. There were issues that Maui reported with the Windows constant missing. That's been fixed. There's another crash and shutdown and some issues with version info. This is not a definitive list, but this is just an example of some of the things that have continued to go in, and we are continuing to make fixes in 1.3 before 1.3 stable ships in a few weeks. In addition, we've got some investigations going on. I can't promise that these will make it into 1.3 stable, the initial release, but we are actively working on these, and if they're not in stable, then they will be in a servicing release very soon after. And this is the low refresh rates issue. There were cases in Power Toys and on some low-end machines where the app was just appearing blank. Runtime issues and the C++ header issues. Continuing work that is being done to get 1.3 stable, to have as many fixes as we can, but stabilizing that and having a good stable release that everyone can move to as soon as that comes out. So that just gives you an idea of some of the things that we've been working on internally in the engineering side of things, some kind of how we're approaching the community and the work in the repo, as well as some of the servicing updates that we have. Gabby, back to you.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for all those updates. Really appreciate getting an inside look there. And with that, I'll just give a little bit of a refresh on what we covered last call, but this information is still true. So 1.3, as Bob said, looking to ship within the next month, hoping to announce that at the next community call. And it's focusing really on improving developer efficiency with WinApp SDK. So making it easier to debug your app, having simpler to use APIs for common features, and then lots of fixes across the board. So we'll continue to use the WinUp SDK and WinUI 1.3 milestones on GitHub to track this, but we know that not everything is on GitHub. And then finally, a little bit release timeline, looking back, looking forward. As I just mentioned, we released, I think since our last call, we released WinApp SDK 1.3 Preview 1. And so that continues with features, bug fixes, preparing for that 1.3 stable release that we're targeting within the next month. And with that, we can go into discussion and Q&A. So I'll stop sharing and bring folks on. Hello, hello, hello.
Good morning, everyone.
Happy to have you on. I know this morning we're getting quite a few questions in over the chat, and so we're just curating all of those, adding them to our behind the scenes processing. So let us know. Hand it over to Savoy.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Q&A section. Let's go ahead and start it off with a question to do we have Dimitri here today?
Not today. We'll follow up over GitHub.
Ryan, let me toss one to you out the gate. Did you have one in mind, or should I pull one for you?
I am knee deep in the YouTube chat, so you feel free to just interrupt me and surprise me.
Okay. Yeah, you've been answering most of these in chat, but it seems like some of them might be good to talk about. I think
Sure.
Something coming up here is Bogdan's wondering around whether we'll plan to replace all WinUI 2 with WinUI 3 controls.
Yeah, great. I did answer that in the chat, but I'm actually also happy to answer it here. WinUI 2, WinUI 3 is really meant to be, in some sense, sort of like a successor to WinUI 2. It's not an exact successor, though, because it uses the Win32 app model rather than UWP, and as people pointed out in the chat, it has a different namespace, and there are a few differences. So it's not like a sort of like a drop-in replacement, you might say. Yeah, by and large, we generally try and encourage people to use WinUI 3. And it's also important to understand that, like, how strongly we recommend WinUI 3 has changed over time too. Like, initially when WinUI 3 sort of was created, it was missing a bunch of features. It didn't have as much stability as WinUI 2. Somebody was asking in the chat, like, hey, why did you use WinUI 2 in File Explorer, and then why are you now using it in WinUI 3? And it's because we were all going through the same journey internally that all of you are going through, which is WinUI 3 was new. We weren't sure if we completely trusted it for something as mission critical as File Explorer. So we were using WinUI 2 in a limited way to start the transition of File Explorer to WinUI. And then as WinUI 3 became more stable and capable, we now feel more confident that we can move WinUI 3 into File Explorer. So it's all just a journey, right? It's like you've got a new version, it has to mature, it has to get all the capabilities in place. We're now probably beyond a critical mass of WinUI 3 where most people can use it, and so we can fairly unequivocally recommend its use. But there are a few things that are still missing, like ink canvas is one of them, for example. We definitely still have some holes that need to be plugged. It's just a lot less than it was, say, like a year or a year and a half ago. That pretty much summarizes the YouTube chat.
Perfect. Thanks, Ryan. A question for Bob. We have one here from Obina asking about .NET 8 support.
Sorry, I couldn't get unmuted. Sorry about that. So we've been working with the .NET team and the Visual Studio team doing the initial testing on .NET 8 support. There are a number of issues that have come up with the Preview 1 build, and we're getting those in place. That will right now .NET 8 is still being developed, and we're working to resolve those issues as it comes in. We saw a very similar process with .NET 7. So there are a number of issues now, but we are going to support .NET 8 and we'll continue to ship fixes on that in 1.3 just to stay in line with the builds.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. Folks, do feel free to jump in and answer questions that you have top of mind. I can give some space for that.
I think Dimitri was going to talk about the problem about the system backdrop working and binding in a markup. And I believe that is fixed in the preview. There was a problem that was preventing it from working. Well, partially fixed. There's a problem that was preventing it from working in markup. And Dimitri put in a fix for that, and I think it's in the latest preview. You still can't bind it with a binding, but you should be able to bind it with an Xbind. The binding requires a dependency object as the target, which window is not in WinUI, but Xbind works with anything that you can set, any property you can set from code behind. So the Xbind should work now.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Did anyone else have a question to jump in with? If not, I can pull some from the chat here.
There was another question here about preview and this selection changed event selection model. Maybe to just say a couple of things about that. I think I saw it here, definitely see it. Well, actually, we get confused internally sometimes too about our terminology. For WinUI 2, we have pre-releases, and in pre-releases, APIs can be experimental. In WinUI 3, we have pre-releases as well, but we have two different names for them. We call them experimental and preview. And so for WinUI 3, only the experimental channel has the experimental APIs. So this selection change is experimental. Still, there's some new work that we were experimenting with around this new selection model, and that is the answer to the question is yes, that is still experimental. It's still preview.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike.
And then there was also a question on the number of issues and our plans for the repo. We're almost at 3,000 issues. So, is there a plan to get that number down? And since October, we've been operating at basically parity and, trying to keep the growth rate. There's been a little bit recently, and that's kind of the goal that we have right now, is continuing to address the new items that come in. To the phrase that I've used internally is to don't do any more damage. And just as much as we can keep that going, we will chip away at those, but we've got a healthy incoming rate, and we're looking to stay on top of those and really not grow it any more than it has been. But that's the goal that we have.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. Anyone else?
I'm happy to jump in on it's not exactly a WinUI 3 related question, but there was a question that came in via GitHub around whether or not we've ever considered using SVG images in the start menu and the taskbar, and is that like an internal discussion that we've had? The reason it's kind of WinUI is because since our team and the WinUI team sort of is the native UX framework for a lot of the internal surfaces inside of Windows, we get this question sometimes, can you support SVG? Can you support it more? Because we actually do support SVG in static secure mode today. But there was a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there was this idea from our design team, which is a fairly large organization in and of itself, to convert basically all of the icons in Windows to SVG. It would have been a colossal undertaking. And they were exploring this, and so there was a lot of questions around whether or not we should do that. The design team largely concluded that that would just be really expensive, basically, to go and reauthor all of the icons basically everywhere in Windows. And it's the way that software is, and all of you know because you make software, 90% of the code you ship, maybe 95% of the code you ship every time you ship is code that was written in some previous version. And so the Windows code base is very much like that too. It's just easier when you want to change some icons to just go and do it the old way and just create different versions for the different display resolutions and desktop scaling resolutions. But we had that conversation at one point, and we had been exploring as a team whether or not we should go beyond static secure mode in WinUI. The real issue with that, there's kind of two issues with that. One is SVG in and of itself is like an incredibly complicated standard, like incredibly complicated. That would require almost a whole other team to basically just implement that. And we've done that at the company. We've done that on the Edge team, and they do support SVG. And the work that went into supporting it there was really massive. And then, so do you redo that work again, but a native version of it? Or do you just host the SVG implementation of Edge in WinUI? And neither of those seemed very palatable. I mean, to redo it all again would be just very costly, and to host the Edge version means you have to bring in a web view, and that means hosting, and then you have to go and eat that performance cost. And so basically, we've never found a good way to like go beyond static secure mode in SVG, and we've never really had a strong need to do it either. It's just really expensive, and we've never really been forced to do it by any customer, including ourselves, but also just externally. There's a few people who are interested in it. There's people who really want to lean into and love SVG, but a lot of people are just, able to function fine with the iconography facilities we have.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. We have a lot more questions coming in on chat, as well as several on GitHub. Did anyone have one that they felt they were ready to answer?
There's one here about a leak. It was a leak in Win2D. So many wins. A leak in Win2D, issue 3665, and I think Chris replied to the repo already. Yeah, that was a bad leak, and there's a fix for it, and the fix is in the preview. So the fix should be available now, and it's part of the preview.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike.
There's also a question here from Jose Silva on is there any plan to address some of the C++ XAML code gen bugs? And that is one of the items that we had that is being investigated for 1.3. I know two of them we have some fixes that are going into ask mode tomorrow, and we have a number of other items that we are looking at some of the issues on inclusion of namespaces. There are a number of C++ issues that are being addressed potentially in 1.3 stable.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. Greg, I have a question for you. Kevin Gallahan is asking, I see the Windows composition gallery has some updates. Any plans to roll it out to the Microsoft Store or combine it with the WinUI 3 gallery?
Yeah, that's a good question. So no plans at the moment would be my answer, but potentially in the future, we'll see.
All right, thanks, Greg. Mike, maybe a question for you, but Adam is asking, is flyout menu ever going to support binding? It's a great control, but the functionality is tough to use if it can't be bound to a collection.
Yeah, don't like that problem either, but we don't have any, we're not active on that right now. It's set up, it's got an items property, it's got an items property, but it's a read-only property so that you can populate it, code or from markup, but it's not a settable property that you can set with the binding is the problem.
All right. Thanks for your answer there. Mike, this is maybe a question for you or for Ryan. Kevin is asking, is anyone working on Win2D? Do we have plans there?
You want that, Mike, or you want me to tackle
We've
that?
got
You might
people
be.
working on. I don't have much of an answer. We've got people working on Win2D. As I mentioned, we just fixed that bug. There had been some work to try. So Win2D is it's got its own repo. It's a package on NuGet. It's not part of WinUp SDK, but it's a package on NuGet that takes a dependency on WinUp SDK. We spent some time looking at refactoring it and putting it into WinUp SDK, and enough time to decide that the refactoring itself wasn't all that beneficial. So we're still looking to bring it into WinUp SDK, but I don't think there's anybody actively working on it right now. But it's still available. It's on NuGet.org. It's an extra reference that you need to make from your application.
All right. Well, question to the room while we're still talking about plans is Kevin's also asking if there's anything in the roadmap around making improvements to the Visual Studio WinUI development experience in the next year.
Bob, do you want to answer? Or do you want me to jump in there?
I can start, and then you can add on to that.
Sure.
We've been going through and looking at fixing a number of the known issues that were there, and we've knocked out a number of those. We still have, for example, I know hot reload is a hot topic that it works in some cases and doesn't work in others. There's some other pieces. Essentially, we don't have feature work planned, but we are looking at making the items that are there and having the current workings work better. And so we're just looking to continue to knock away at those issues. Ryan, if you want to add to that.
I don't have a lot more to add. I would say there's no grand plans. Like, we don't have grand plans. I know that a designer is like a hot topic on that. I know that that's on people's minds. That's like a grand plan. That's like a SVG scale plan. And we just have other grand plans that are more important. It's not that nothing's a never, but at this time, that's not really on the close horizon.
All right. A question for you, Mike, and stop me if this has been answered already, but someone is asking, what's the process at MS for releasing a feature with a preview flag? And particularly they're answering because the tree view selection changed event.
Yeah, we talked about that. And actually,
okay.
Yeah, we did talk about that. But actually, as we moved on, I realized I still screwed it up. I said preview when I meant pre-release. So just to be clear, that particular feature is experimental in the WinUI 2 pre-release, and it's experimental in the WinUI 3 experimental channel.
To summarize that, preview is a release candidate for a stable release, and it does not contain anything experimental. Experimental is its own channel.
All right.
There's two questions that I can answer.
Go for it.
The first one was, sorry, I want to get the name right here. It was around internal team usage. Random Spam was asking. That's a great name. What about WinUI in MS products? Teams, Azure Storage Explorer, or Chromium, Office is using their own thing. Great question. And I think it ends with a little bit of a barb to hey, if Microsoft isn't using it, why should we? Well, first of all, Microsoft is using it. We are using it in Phone Link. We are using it in File Explorer, which is one of the top 5 most launched experiences in the entire Windows experience in the world. And so we are using it in some other areas too. There are some other companies that are using it, but they haven't made their announcements yet, like big companies that are like Fortune 100 companies. So there is some usage, but you should also realize that all those companies you mentioned, like Teams or Office, like especially Office, these are companies that are like massive. Like each of those would be its own massive company if they were a separate company. That's how large those properties are. And so they have massive code bases that are legacy code bases to them now that are millions of lines of code, and for them to just switch over is a major decision. So, like, I think if we were going to write Office from scratch, that would probably be a very realistic conversation we would have. Should we use WinUI 3 to write it from scratch? But it's not being written from scratch. It is a colossal code base that uses already many UI frameworks, not just one. And so usually the conversations with them is how do we mix WinUI in places that it makes sense. And we've had conversations with those groups already about mixing WinUI 3 in various ways. So these are like huge container ships on the ocean, and it takes all years to turn them. So that's why you're not seeing just overnight Office using WinUI 3 across PowerPoint and Excel and Word and things like that. It's just not nearly that simple. But more nimble things that we're using, like for example, PhoneLink, they have a smaller dev team, they're a smaller code base, and they're able to go and rapidly use it, and so it's easier for them to stay on the latest, and WinUI 3 is the latest. So I hope that answer makes sense. And then there was another question that I wanted to answer. Sorry, I'm now blanking. Michael Pettit is asking if WinApp SDK releases become giant and monolithic instead of by each control, do you essentially have the same problem as UWP and Windows releases? And that's a really good question. The reason I wanted to highlight it is because it's actually a question that we are facing now internally, which is the WinApp SDK is getting slowly more and more technologies in it. Well, actually, before I even say that, I do want to just make sure there isn't a misconception, since Michael, you sort of mentioned like if WinApp SDK becomes giant and monolithic instead of by each control. To be clear, WinApp SDK doesn't ship controls; it ships platform technologies. There's actually a difference between WinApp SDK and WinUI. WinUI 3 is the most prominent technology in the WinApp SDK, but there are other technologies in the WinApp SDK. The WinApp SDK is meant to be kind of akin to the Windows SDK in the sense that it ships a wide range of technologies. So I don't think we would ever really get down to like shipping individual controls separately in the WinApp SDK. So just in case there's anyone confused about that, but whole technologies like WinUI 3. Like the display information APIs and other pieces. Those are all platform pieces that all ship as part of the Windows App SDK. And to talk about the monolithicness of it, as we accrue these technologies, what we're finding is that it's becoming harder and harder to keep the promises we wanted to make around Windows App SDK. The main one being how far in market do we ship, or how far we use the term down level do we ship. Right now, the WinApp SDK attempts to certify everything in it works down to Windows 10 RS5. And that's actually the biggest difference, I think, between the Windows App SDK and the Windows SDK. The Windows SDK, new technologies show up. It's only on the latest version of Windows. You got to take a Patch Tuesday or something in order to go and get those APIs. And that means all your customers have to have the latest version of Windows. And that's been for as long as I've worked at the company, a pain point of the Windows SDK is we debut new platform technologies, but the ecosystem can't use it. And so the whole idea, the main idea of the Windows App SDK was ship new platform innovations into the market so that they're ready on day one, meaning they work to in-market versions of Windows. And the way our strategy that we've been using to date, and it's still true today, is make it all work down to Windows 10 RS5. I know I'm using internal Redstone technology. I can't remember Mike, do you remember what the version number is for RS5?
I think it's 17.763.
Okay, great. Down to 17.763 if we've got that right. Yeah, that's fine. That's been our strategy all along. What we're finding is as we accrue more stuff in the Windows App SDK, keeping that promise is just harder. And we're already breaking the promise. There's some things in the Windows App SDK that actually just doesn't work down that far. We've been really trying to limit that contagion, so to speak, like not allow it to grow and fester. But there are already some chips in the armor around how we can take these technologies down level. And I think a day is coming where we're going to have to redefine what in-market shipping means to provide more flexibility for all of the different platform pieces to go down as far as they can go down in some sense. And so it's a really timely question, Michael, because there's internal discussions happening on our team right now around how do we do that? How do we keep the vision of the Windows App SDK, which is make things available in market on day one, but also be able to absorb more and more platform technologies and not to alienate them with this rigid rule that we currently have, which is go down to RS5 or whatever the public number is on that. So I hope that makes sense, and just shares a little bit about the internal debates that we have. We're, as we're constantly trying to figure out how do we deliver the right value to all of you in the smartest way that we can.
We're debating the version number in the chat. We got it.
Did you get it? 1809, is that it? There it is.
Well, there's two. There's like the Windows version is 1809. The build number is 17763.
Oh, okay, yeah. Probably the Windows version is the one I should have said, but yeah, down to 1809. So making a blanket statement down to 1809 is becoming harder. Every release, it becomes harder and harder and harder to make that blanket statement. So we are rethinking about should we change that down level promise.
And we do have APIs already today that don't work down that low. And so there's a pattern there is supported. Like if there's a class that we have a general pattern, if there's a API that doesn't work in all situations, such as all the way down to 1809, there's a is supported method on it. And so you can check that first to see if it's going to work or not. So like the Mica controller doesn't work on the RS5, and so there's a is supported API that you can call and check at runtime. That actually relates to another question that was in here about the new backdrop APIs. So there were the Mica and desktop acrylic controller APIs that have been around for a while, and one of those you have to do the is supported check to see if it works or not. Last month, Dimitri showed the backdrop APIs we added to make that a lot easier. And there was a question, I think it was in the YouTube chat. It's missing some functionality like tint color, I think. I don't know if we're going to add those. And yes, we're looking to add those, no plans. But yes, we're looking to add those. You can still fall back and use the controller APIs like you could before, just with the complication that it's more lines of code. But we designed the new backdrop API so that we can start plugging in more properties to it.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are close to the top of the hour here. So I'll just take this moment to close us out and say we had a ton of questions today, several on GitHub that we didn't get to and several more in the chat. As always, if there's a question you had that we didn't get answered, please do feel welcome to write it on our repo. We have the discussion issue format, which is perfect for things like these. And the team, I believe, always tries to get back to the questions written on the community call discussion post. So thanks, everyone who spent this time with us and asked great questions. And thanks to the team for taking time to answer them. Gabby, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Savoy. It was great to hear from many of our team members this call. Great to hear from you as well on the comments. So we look forward to seeing you next call. And with that, have a great rest of your day. Bye.